Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So glad that you all wanted to learn about the AI conversation and all the great things that are happening over at Zenarate in terms of training collectors using AI as a coaching tool, which I think is the word flight simulator will be used a few times, I'm sure. And just to give you a little bit of a preview, but Holly, thank you so much for coming on and joining me today and having a conversation about what you guys are doing over there.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. So, for those of you that are watching today, feel free to leave questions in the chat. We'll be watching the questions throughout the presentation, and I'm sure y'all would like to be able to ask direct questions to Holly. She's got a lot of deep knowledge on the subject. But to kind of kick it off, we'll start kind of walking through a deck here and having a discussion around what Zenarate is doing over there from an AI coaching standpoint, and then we'll kind of break it out into questions as they come across. But I'll be monitoring as we continue to go. So, Holly, can you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Holly Kerns Gagnard. I lead the customer success team at Zenarate. So I've been in really a call center operations environment for over a decade. I spent some time at a debt buyer back in the day, right when the CFPB came out. So I really feel like I've grown up in this industry amidst all the changes that have occurred, and have found myself now at Zenarate for almost 4 years. So really focused on the training space now in call center operations.
Fantastic. And so, from a really high level, can you tell everybody like what Zenarate is and what like your primary focus is?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Zenarate really, so you said it at the beginning, you're going to hear the term flight simulator all the time in this webinar. You can think of it as a flight simulator for call center operations or call center jobs. So it's really interactive training solutions powered by artificial intelligence, where anyone in your organization can interact with their AI coach, which is simulating a customer that they would interact with on a daily basis, and also providing them real-time in the moment feedback when they miss a best and required practice. So not only is it the customer, it's also the coach, and they can interact with their AI coach in the privacy of their own home or training room with a headset and a Chrome browser.
Fantastic. Well, let's kind of jump into your deck here. I know that you guys have a storyline in how you kind of explain this. And for anybody that hasn't seen it, Holly and I also did a receivables roundtable together where she kind of gave me a high level look at what they're doing. But I'm kind of excited to see how much deeper we can go down the rabbit hole today in terms of how all this coaching works and how quickly you've been able to help organizations make a collector profitable because that timeline, right, of bringing in a new employee and getting them actually ready to get out there and be interacting with consumers, that can take a long time, especially when we're dealing with a remote environment. So you guys have developed some tools around that have really opened the door for the agencies.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a really fun transition for me to go from being in the call center environment to now more of a bird's eye view working with other people in the call center environment. And I can't tell you how many times we talk to somebody and they say, oh my gosh, when I was on the phone, I wish I had something like this. I think about that constantly. I wish I had this in my previous life. So, really, what we'll talk about today are some of the top training challenges that folks will have to overcome in a call center environment, specifically around collections. So, we'll really focus this conversation around the collections group and space.
Mhm.
But we at Zenarate do work with many different industries. So, banking, travel, healthcare, sales are just a few of the other industries that we work with. You can think of your AI coach as being able to simulate any sort of conversation. So whether that's my kids in school learning how to address a bully, to your collectors learning how to navigate the call center environment with compliance and negotiation and strategy and all of the things that come with being a collector. So we'll really talk a lot about that today.
Awesome. So
Perfect.
the
So
high level challenges, right? Like
go
give
ahead.
us the 10,000 foot view here.
Absolutely. So, gone are the days where a customer would call in and pleasantly say, "Hey, can you just tell me what my balance is?"
Those days
They're
existed?
rarely pleasant. I know, right? Well,
Oh, okay.
I'm told they did. I never lived in them, so it's folklore at this point. But they're very challenging, right? So
Mhm.
these agents are having to deal with regulated calls, complex products and services that they have to help navigate customers through, frustrated customers, and then limited coaching. So we all know that when there's an influx of hiring and it's rush, 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 get people on the phones. It's really difficult to manage call volumes and you're trying to push people through, and they kind of learn by doing it in the moment with a live customer.
Mhm.
So those problems really are leaving that on the collector themselves. So some of the things that we've seen across the industry, and I'm sure you can echo this as well, Adam, is up to 50% year one attrition.
Mhm.
So folks start, you invest the time to get them going, and then by year one, 50% of them have already left. This isn't the job for them. 6 to 12 months speech proficiency. So it's really hard for people to get up and running and feel confident and having all kinds of conversations with the
Mhm.
customer. 2 to 3% or times performance gaps, right? So your top collectors versus your bottom collectors, there's a huge gap there. Compliance anxiety, right? I mean, we all talk about the CFPB. There's always a new rule, law, regulation that's coming out. There's always a rush to make sure that people aren't having those QA violations. And
Mhm.
that causes a lot of anxiety on the phone. Gosh, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say? And then work from home. So that's more latest and greatest, if you will. I think it's starting to become not so latest, right? It's been about 3 years now that we've had to deal with a lot of the working from home
Sure.
environments. But how do you manage training people when they're no longer in your four walls at the
Well, and
institution?
I think that's become a massive challenge, right? So there's always been the challenge of the high attrition rates in the collection space, or really any call center, operation, right? Whether you're BPO or calling the collector, wherever the case may be, there's always this level of challenging keeping your people in that timeline to get somebody truly up and running and comfortable and confident. We've all been through collector training, or a lot of us have been through collector training and looked at the tests and the questions and how it's all structured. But right in the end, you can do all of that in advance, but you're still at this point being required to build the plane while you're flying it. Right. So you're trying to strap on some
Exactly.
wings while you're already in the air as a new agent, just immediately being on the phone and having these customer conversations. And are you really ready from a compliance standpoint? Now, if you're being trained appropriately, you can develop that confidence level and an understanding of what the rules actually mean, right? You can't just
Hmm.
read the law at people and expect them to understand its practical application in a call center environment. And so I think the
Hmm.
that learning process has always been a major challenge, which is why there's so much, education available these days in terms of how the industry functions, and we're trying to feed the agents new and better information, or find new ways to communicate the information to them so that they can develop that confidence level faster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And too, with working from home, right? You
Hmm.
used to get a lot of, okay, I'm going to go and do OJT, or I'm going to go on the floor and I can listen to my neighbor who's more tenured collector and
Hmm.
I pick up on things that they're saying. With people working from home, you don't get that anymore. So now not only are you still isolated off out of training, you don't have the benefit of listening to other folks doing a great job on the phone with a customer, so you start to feel very siloed, very nervous, not so confident. And then, of course, you get your QA scores back as a collector, and you think, oh, how am I ever going to get this right? And it's so stressful for them and for the trainers because they don't know, there's so much challenge in trying to reach across the computer screen to help someone along the way.
Well, I mean, I think best practices get lost in a remote environment, right? You're not there for the camaraderie. You're not having the water cooler chatter about what is working for them or why they're having such a great day or a bad day. And there's something, being lost in the transmission there. I've definitely experienced it in growing our organization generation exponentially post-COVID, right? When everybody's remote. I'm literally the last person in the office now. And so like it takes more time, and I have to spend more specific time with new people that are coming in so that I can help to transfer some of the knowledge and experiences that we've had either as individuals or as organizations to the next generation of our leadership.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Totally spot on. So yeah, these are all the challenges, right? And you're thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do about them,
Mhm.
right? So what our clients have found is the AI coach is the flight simulator for collections. And again, we use this analogy a lot
Sure.
because it's the easiest thing to really connect the dots.
Mhm.
You're never going to have your pilot go directly from tests and quizzes to flying, your flight to India in a couple months, right?
Exactly.
You don't want that person to be the one that, yeah, this is my first flight. Let's try it out, right? So that flight simulator is a common thing in a lot of industries, but for call centers. So you can think of this as the call center flight simulator. So what we're not doing is replacing kind of your normal learning path. So you're still going to have your LMS facilitation. You're still having your new hire class go in front of a trainer or facilitator. Maybe that's in the office now. Maybe it's still remote. They're still going to take tests and quizzes. They're still going to have that knowledge transfer. But after that, before where they would normally then go to the phones and test out their skills, that middle piece now that we're filling the gap is you get that AI coach
Mhm.
practice. So they're able, those collectors or agents are able to master different call types, different call skills, soft skills, compliance skills, negotiation skills, and master those best and required practices through that time with their AI coach. And then it also helps them auto certify to be able to take those live calls with a customer. So, whereas I know we've had a lot of customers who before Zenarate would say, yeah, we have a week-long boards process, right? Where you
Mhm.
have to get up and have a one-on-one, this is your final certification before you hit the phones. And this could take weeks, right? Days to get your entire class through. Now you can certify everyone at one time within 30 minutes, and the AI coach will tell you if they're ready to go on the floor. And then, of course, once they move to the floor and go into a production environment,
Mhm.
taking live calls, your AI coach is still there following those agents and helping them close any skill gaps that are identified either on the floor, or let's say you get a new way that the team wants to negotiate, or there's a new payment system you have to use,
Mhm.
or a new law is coming out and you need to upskill all your agents at one time. Now you can do that through your AI coach.
That's interesting, and you're able to do that in a scattered time block, so you're not pulling everybody off the floor for an individual training. But I want to go back to one thing, and then we do have a question as well. Um, it sounds to me like what you guys are doing is providing the individual building blocks of success for an individual call agent, meaning a negotiation skill module. So you've got these different kind of building blocks that an organization can then say, "All right, I want these blocks in this pyramid, and this is how I define success as an organization." And then you guys are basically just developing those individual blocks that can be applied to that skill learning process and then deployed at scale.
Exactly. Yes. And that's a really good point, Adam. So it's not, hey, this is what we think is great and you shall do this through our simulator. We're partnering with each organization to understand what are their best and required practices.
Sure.
What do they want? Have every agent be great at your way of doing things. What would that sound like? And we will fine tune the AI coach to help deliver those best and required practices to your agents to your needs. So it's very customizable. And I think to your point too, talking about building blocks or modulars, yes, we talk about that a lot too, right? If you want folks to only practice the call opening, they can do that in what we call a call flow step. If you want them to really focus on just the negotiation, they'll focus on just the middle of the call, or they need to really practice offering direct pay at the end of the conversation. They can focus on that as well. And they can also focus on a variety of situations in one go. So where they'll have no idea what's coming at them next, right?
Mhm.
You have to always deal with a customer. You don't know if they're going to be yelling at you, crying, if they're going to be confused, have a lot of questions. the AI coach will simulate all of those personas and throw random persona and situation at the agent, really prove their abilities to handle anything that comes their way on the call to your best and required practices.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this, and this is from the questions in the chat. But does the Zenarate's AI coach also have features and capabilities to onboard B2B salespeople?
Yes, absolutely. What a great question. So today we're really focused on collections, but lots of different industries. Sales is one of the most common
Mhm.
ones. So dealing with both obviously the agent to the consumer, but business to business is huge, right? A lot of times, and I talk to customers about this a lot, that conversation becomes really complex, especially if you're talking about delivering products or services
Mhm.
that are of a very complex space. Think about healthcare sales,
Mhm.
that gets really complex. We do a lot of conversations that simulate that
Okay.
so that agents not only can work through the technical aspect of that B2B sales conversation, but then also the soft skills that you need to learn in the sales environment as well and marry the two together.
Well, it sounds like this comes back to the building blocks, right? Like if I've got a negotiation building block and a healthcare, basic understanding, and then healthcare, 102, it's almost like building your college curriculum, right? And you're able to build a
Mm-hmm.
curriculum that is specific to the needs of your organization, or I'm assuming subsets of your organization. Like my sales team can be trained one way, my collectors can be trained another, my accounting team or customer service reps another. But some of the same basic skill sets would apply across all of those, but then there would be specialization to the curriculum as it relates to the individual job roles.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
You're spot on, Adam.
I'm trying to restate in my own mind as to like how I can start to leverage a tool set like this across all the different consulting operations that we do and other experiences that we have. But that modularization of the learning process, I think, allows you to transfer kind of basic and compliance related knowledge across, or even across organizations, while allowing each organization to customize what they need for themselves, right? And so that they can still be
Mhm.
unique and different as organizations, but at the same time, there's some best practices that really do need to be shared across the entire space.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, there was another question about the customization of the AI coach. Is that a capability within the tool for clients to use and customize it themselves, or does Zenarate provide customization as a service?
Great question. So the answer is both. We're always there to help. So a lot of our clients find it more useful for to have us, deliver and build those stories for them. We'll always partner with you, and there's a lot of different touch points along the way that the client themselves will have the ability to self-service, if you will. So we'll work with each client individually to determine what type of relationship they prefer to have. So whether that be really high touch from them or more high touch from our side, most folks, like I said, get really used to my team helping along the way. We're always there to really provide not only the services to create the stories, but also we do share best practices across industries. Share with you along the way some of the most important aspects to consider as you're rolling out a tool like this, whether it be to new hires or tenured agents or what have you. So regardless of really which path you choose, we're always there.
Sounds good. All right. Well, let's we can kind of continue down the path here. So like one of the things we were talking about is the different methods and ways in which people are learning. So talk to us a little bit about it
Mhm.
from the perspective of what you guys have seen and what the platform has learned from working with so many different agents.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's three main ways that people learn. 10% of folks learn from seeing. 20% learn from listening, but 70% learn from doing. So this is very well-known research across the board. In fact, I hate to mention my kids all the time, but I have two young ones. And one of them, the teacher just sent something home, hey, tell me how you learn. Do you learn from seeing? Do you learn from listening? Do you learn from doing? And I think a lot more people are getting used to, hey, this isn't just standard process,
Mhm.
right? I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to stand and show you everything that I want you to know. And then I'm expecting you to go off and be amazing at it. Where I think people are really starting to be more adaptive and want to be adaptive to the different ways in which people learn. And while seeing and listening is still obviously important aspects of that, we found the majority of people learn from doing. So that's where getting your reps in talking to an AI coach before doing it live with a customer, it just means you're going to work out those kinks. You're going to make those mistakes on your AI coach, who's patient, unbiased, isn't going to yell at you, isn't going to embarrass you, isn't going to get you in trouble, right? And then you can really do your best live with the customer. So that's typically what we've seen across our user base.
Well, I mean, that sounds about right. I mean, if you look at the Malcolm Gladwell book, I think it was Outliers, where they talk about it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, and it's not 10,000 hours of watching somebody else do it. It's 10,000 hours of actually doing it, right? Performing an individual task if you're going to become an expert at it or a professional. And I thought that was really interesting, right? Because I'm somewhat of a visual learner. Like I definitely learn by seeing, but there's nothing like the repetitions of actually conducting an action to determine or to improve your proficiency at that action. If you do something every day, you're going to be better at, you're always going to get better at it than you were on day one. And I think being able to separate or to make some of those early mistakes in a closed environment to where you're focused on talking to a piece of technology versus an individual can increase your confidence level and allow you to go through those repetitions and to not feel as embarrassed or self-conscious through the process. And I mean, to me, that adds something to the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just get more confident on your own time, if you will. And it doesn't add, I mean, I think we've all been in a situation where we've had to do a role play in front of other people, even if it was just the one person you were doing it with. And I mean, my heart starts racing just thinking about it, right? So not having to do that, getting to, really do it on your own time is really huge. And then getting those reps in place. But I would love to kind of then talk about some of the use cases, right? So you think about, okay, and the question was great. Can this be used in B2B sales? It can be used in a lot of different things, but regardless of the industry even, we think about really 3 areas that this is best placed. And the first one is right at the beginning, which is candidate screening. So this has really a 2-pronged approach. One is, hey, I want to make sure that these folks have the right technical skills for the job, that they are everything they've put on their resume, they can kind of prove to me. It's kind of like, I think a lot of customer or employees now, or employers, I should say, are doing those behavioral assessments, right? That's kind of the new thing. It's very similar to that, right? Not only will I know the way that you interact with people, I'm going to really understand, are you able to do this job? And in collections, especially, that's huge because there's a certain skill set. On the flip side, and this is where I think it's really, especially in something like collections, where it allows that person, that candidate, to see if they really like doing the job before they get into the organization.
Fair
right?
enough.
Because you could think.
Fair enough. And I
Right?
guarantee you that's a massive play into lowering the attrition rate.
Exactly, right? Because how many people are think, oh, collections is easy, it's no problem. I can do that. I can tell people how much they owe and I can make that money, right? It is a whole different beast when you get into it. So being able to have them interact before they come in is a huge ability to lower that attrition.
No, and even though it's difficult to find good employees always, but specifically in our current time block, um, I think this really plays well into it because I'd rather have a class of 2 when I'm looking for a class of 10 and know that those 2 I can invest more into them, right? Versus that more spread approach where I'm investing as much time as I can to 10 individuals, knowing that 8 of them just aren't going to make it. To me, this is like one of those great pre-screening, make sure that it's a cultural fit, that they're going to actually enjoy this, because you're never going to get good at something that you can't find some level of joy in doing.
Exactly. And it's kind of exciting for potential candidates too, right? Wow, look at this cool technology. Am I going to get to train on this? I'm going to feel more supported as someone coming on board. So that brings us to the second, which is new hire training. We've already talked a ton about that today. It really makes a ton of sense to have everybody go through their AI coach and learn really the top areas that they're going to be encountering on the phones. And really, again, work out those jitters, if you will, before the first live call. And then, of course, assess their readiness to take those calls. And what we've seen through putting people through the AI coach and new hire training is 40 to 70% faster speed to proficiency. So previous new hire classes that didn't have the benefit of going through their AI coach took much longer to really get up to speed than it did for those who did go through their AI coach.
So we had another question that came up that was kind of saying that wouldn't a candidate's call differ from the one being used by the recruiter's organization, and wouldn't the AI be biased towards a potential candidate? I'm going to let you answer that one as well, but I kind of want to make a statement on that one that I think what Holly's trying to say is that we're leveraging this technology to enable a potential candidate who might be a collector or a salesperson to have this conversation in a boxed environment, and it's a two-way screening process. It's screening in terms of the organization saying, hey, this person might be a good fit, but it's also the person saying maybe I'm a good fit for collections or not, because all too often in that first 120 days in terms of attrition, you're losing a significant amount of people because they didn't understand what debt collection was. They didn't understand what that process felt like or what they were going to be encountering on a day-to-day basis, or maybe they just don't like being tied to a phone, right? Everybody's got their own, reasons for liking or disliking the profession, but I think it's important that you get that kind of pre-screened opportunity. To me, that's a two-way street.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that, Adam. And I completely agree with you. And really it's around making sure that, they have appropriate communication skills, right? Can they answer basic questions in a soft skill environment? Can they demonstrate empathy when a customer, shows that they're upset or frustrated? And I agree with you, Adam. It really is almost more for the benefit of the candidate than it is for the actual hiring manager, because it does allow them to flesh out whether or not it's something that either side wants. And of course, it's a piece of the puzzle, right?
Mhm.
Just like those behavioral assessments, just like the interview, it's a piece of the puzzle in bringing someone into the organization and gives them a taste of what to expect in terms of how they'll be supported in their training when they do get onboarded.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Yep, perfect. And thank you so much for the questions. Keep them coming. I love them. They always keep these conversations interesting. And then the third one is really around tenured upskilling. So, when you think about, especially when everyone was really back in the office and you could listen to what does a great collector sound like versus those folks who really had the attitude, the willingness to do well, but were just stressed out by the job, right? Talking a lot about those problems, the compliance anxiety, the fact that the call volumes were so high, they want to really perform. Inserting their AI coach in the areas that they're struggling with is a really great way to get those, to close those call skill gaps that your agents who are on the production floor are actually experiencing. And you can target that training. So I think you mentioned this earlier, Adam, where it's really hard to get people off the phones, and you certainly don't want to take your whole environment off the phones at one time to go into a room and do training,
It's
right?
correct.
So if you can say, right, maybe I'm struggling with empathy, I can take 15 minutes, practice empathy with my AI coach, and then jump back on the phones. And then you at the same time, in another day are struggling with negotiation, let's say. You can take a quick training on negotiation and jump back in. So you're getting really quick hits at your really customized timeframes that
Mhm.
fit both your schedule and the schedule of the call center themselves.
I think that's important, right? Like again, it goes back to those building blocks and being able to segregate, a skill set versus the skill set, right? Like to say what does success look like? Success, if we break it down into smaller pieces, is modules that start to come together towards a larger curriculum. So it's an interesting approach.
Yep, absolutely. Perfect. Should we go next? So this is a little bit about what it's like to interact with your AI coach. So you're going to go into a workbench for any story. So you'll hear me use the term stories a lot. Story is just a topic, any topic you want your agents to be great at. So again, think about high frequency, high impact topics. The one that's on the screen here is the initial demand outbound, and it says hard. So what that means is this is going to be a hard customer. This is your first time you're calling them, and you have to go through and try and get them to pay you, right? You can see on the call notes section here that the customer's name, that they've been past due for 2 months, their total amount due is $500. So it's giving me all the pertinent details that I need to have the conversation. And you can see on the top kind of right area is where your conversation with your AI coach is transcribed. So I'm actually going through here. Imagine I'm a new hire. I'm in the training room. I'm at home. All I'm doing is putting on a headset. I'm in my Chrome browser. This window is popped up and I hit audio recording and I go. So I hear the customer response to me. I can speak to it. My speech to text is transcribed in real time. I can hear the customer respond just as I would if it was a real customer live on the phone. And then of course, I'm also getting that in the moment feedback. So for instance, let's take this case, right? This person has a total amount due of $500. Let's say I opened the call and said, hey, Miss Smith, it looks like you have a past due amount of $150. Can you pay that today? That was my first statement on negotiation. Anyone in this industry knows, oh gosh, ask for the total amount due, ask for it all up front, right? Mm-hmm. So the AI coach is going to stop me and say, that's not a best practice. At this point in the conversation, it's a best practice to ask for the total amount due. Try again. So then in the moment, I will then say, okay, Miss Smith, you have a total amount due of $500. Are you able to make that payment today? And then it'll allow me to continue on with the conversation. So just as if you and I were role playing back and forth, you would stop me, right? No, Holly, don't ask for the past due yet. Go for the full amount due. Same sort of thing. The AI coach would be stopping me along the way. And then finally, I can practice as many times as I want. It's private to me. I'm, doing it in the comfort of my headset, right? Mm-hmm. And I can go back and take a listen to my practices, find my best, and share it with my training manager, my leader, my whoever it might be.
Okay.
And one interesting thing about this, because sometimes people hear this and think, okay, so, you're going to have to share a practice with me, and then I'm going to have to listen back to all these practices, where's the upskill in that, right? What's funny is that it's not so much the feedback that trainer is going to ever give on that practice. It's simply the act of going back and self-reflecting on my own practices, finding what I think is great, and sharing that with a coach that's really going to help me be a better agent.
That's interesting. It's really the hook, right? It's the hook that's saying, hey, here's a reason to go back and listen to it again. Because if you just tell someone to go listen to what they've already done, they're not really listening, mm-hmm. right? So if they're going in and they're listening right. with an objective, they're the new, decider as to what was the best one that they had. Yeah, because the feedback on your best one, okay, it'll be, less feedback than you're going to get on the other 20 tries, but it's the act of going back and listening mm-hmm. to the 20 calls. I like that.
Exactly.
I like that.
Exactly.
Here's an interesting question. I'm curious on. Does the AI coach return the same accuracy with respect to speech identification for non-native speakers of English language?
It's a fantastic question. We get this question all the time. So the answer is the AI coach is meant to respond back based on the intent behind what you're trying to say. Mm-hmm. It's not scripting. There's no scripting anywhere in the platform unless, of course, it's a compliance verbatim that you want, like the mini Miranda, right? That you want someone to read verbatim. Mm-hmm. So outside of that, what the AI coach is listening for is, what is the agent trying to say to me? Just as Adam, you and I are having this conversation, I'm listening to the intent behind your words. I'm not listening to every single word. Mm-hmm. So the speech to text aspect doesn't necessarily matter. It's the AI coach's response. And your AI coach will learn to understand anyone who communicates. So we talk about this a lot with all of our customers. There will certainly be instances where the AI coach will struggle in the beginning to understand someone. And by maybe the second, third time that person interacts, the AI coach does understand because it's learning to adapt. Of course, on the flip side, one thing that you always want to keep in mind, and some folks really use this tool in this way, is to make sure that the agent themselves is going to be understood by a human.
Mm.
If a human can't understand you, if I'm mumbling, if I'm really far away from my microphone, you're going to have a hard time understanding me. That's going to be a frustrating conversation. So your AI coach will also remind the agent, hey, we can't hear you, or, hey, be a little more clear on your statement in this regard. So it'll also help folks through that to make sure that a customer themselves can understand you.
Makes sense.
Perfect. Let me go next. All right, so really what we're going to dig into are a couple fun, I have 4 examples of real life stories that we have with our customer base here to really get your thoughts flowing on where the AI coach can be inserted and for what kinds of topics. So the first one here is around compliance. This is really, compliance is table stakes across this industry, across many industries, right? It's the first thing you need to achieve throughout when you leave new hire training. So this story is an actual agent going through the opening of a conversation, and they missed reading the QA disclosure. So they missed informing the customer that the call is being recorded and monitored. So you can see the first time they practiced throughout this story, they found out they were speaking to Mary Smith, and they jumped directly into authenticating that it was the correct Mary Smith. The AI coach recognized that they missed reading that QA disclosure, stopped them, asked them to try again doing so, and they were able to correct themselves. In the second practice, so in subsequent practices that they went through, because they had been redirected prior, they didn't make the same mistake. So they were successfully able to say, all right, this call is being recorded and monitored. Now let me validate I'm speaking to the correct Mary Smith. So this is just one example here where that agent is reminded in the moment, hey, you missed the best required practice. And because of that reminder, they were able to correct their mistakes, subsequently then not having that same error with a live customer causing a QA misstep, if you will. Perfect. Is there another question, Adam?
It looks like there is. Any idea about the AI's learning curve? Maybe a range with reasonable assumptions.
Yes, absolutely. So we really have it down to a science. So it's when you think about making stories, you can think about just making donuts, right? If you've ever been to Krispy Kreme, you see the donuts going through, they get iced. It's very predictable. Same sort of thing about making or creating these stories. So we'll start with a call outline or a call template. So if you could wave a magic wand on this topic, what would your agents, how would the conversation flow? And then to build the AI coach brain on your best and required practices, it takes about 3 weeks. So we'll have 3 weeks, about 15 minutes a day. You'll have about 3 subject experts who will interact with their AI coach. They practice just for those 15 minutes. That's all that's needed. So very quick hit. And the AI coach learns overnight. So it's called supervised learning. So that timeline is very predictable. And then, of course, once you go through that timeline, every subsequent story can have much faster lift.
Sounds like a very quick turnaround time in terms of the ability for the system to learn and understand kind of that intent. But I don't think you're starting from total scratch with each deployment, right? Like there's a brain and an engine that's got some previous experience to apply, and then it's kind of applying this icing in some regard in terms of what you're specifically looking for.
That's exactly right. Yep. It's really about tweaking it to the customer's best and required practices that are specific to their organization. So really think of it as it's like a fine-tuning dial.
Makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah. So the next example is empathy. So this is a really huge one. This is, one that's really tough thing to teach. It's really difficult to master where it's best to insert empathy with the customer without going maybe too far or disingenuous, right? So really, how do you make sure that you're allowing the agents to learn a culture of empathy in collections? So in this particular case, this agent's going through this practice, and they find out that the customer can't pay. So they start digging in, asking probing questions. They ask, hey, do you have a cosigner? Yep, my cosigner is my father. Okay, well, is he able to help make payments? No, I'm sorry. I'm on my own here. My dad has also lost his job recently. So in the first practice, the agent thinks, okay, no problem. I'm going to jump directly to an extension program. That's what makes the most sense, right? Okay, I understand. I have a perfect program, and jumps directly into the program. Really miss that opportunity to connect with the customer. So the AI coach interrupted them. Hey, please ensure you show the customer empathy in regards to the cosigner situation. So in the subsequent practice 2, you see in the same area of this conversation, they're able to stop and show that empathy and pause, right? So showing empathy and pausing is such a huge aspect of really becoming genuine in your interactions with the customers, making sure they understand that you're really there to help them. Because that's the thing that everyone in this industry, I know, goes around telling people, I promise we're trying to help people. We are. We're here to make sure that people are able to reach financial freedom, and we want to do what's right by them. And in this case, showing empathy is such a huge aspect of that. So the AI coach is helping agents along the way there.
Very interesting. And, a pause in language is probably more powerful than any word that we could come out with, right? Like being able to or understand when to speak and when not to speak is equally or even more important.
Absolutely. So 2 more examples. This one's my favorite, the negotiation coaching. So you think about any organization, especially in collections, there's a particular waterfall that they typically like to approach a negotiation conversation with. So we talked earlier about asking for the total amount due first. In this conversation, the agent was able to do that. And when they found out that the customer couldn't pay, they jumped directly into probing questions. All right, well, what happened? What was the RFD? What was the reason for you defaulting? And in this case, they didn't exhaust the initial negotiation waterfall to this client's specifications, right? So they were reminded, hey, a little too early to dig into those probing questions. First, ask if they can pay the past due amount. So in subsequent practices, again, they were able to correct themselves. So around that negotiation waterfall, really driving in the repetition of ensuring that agents are going through the right buckets at the right time in the conversation.
Okay, so stopping them from going for the hard sell too fast and being able to adjust the flow of the conversation. But that is the art of conversation, right? Versus just throwing everything you have on the table up front, but knowing when to pause, being able to walk through and help them to understand um, the path to success, right? Because you're right, there's a waterfall to it, just like we've got our data waterfalls. There's a waterfall to the way in which we're willing to negotiate or are going through these discussions in bulk. So it's an interesting approach.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that we typically see is folks getting a little nervous when they first get on the phone and they hear a lot of no's, and their immediate jump is, okay, well, call me back when you think you can, find something that works. And ending the conversation too soon. So allowing them the confidence to know that, hey, I'm asking these questions so that we can come to a solution faster for the benefit of the customer.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then the last one is around direct pay. So it's just another example. And you can imagine we can guide the agent along any sort of skill that you want them to achieve. The 4 that we selected here that I wanted to go over today are really some of the 4 most common at their core. But this is really around the end of the conversation. So assuming that this agent was able to get full payment from the customer, they went a little too early into just closing the call. Great, I got my payment. All right, bye. And in this case, right, remind them, hey, by the way, you don't need to call to make a payment. You don't need to mail your payment in. You can go online and set up direct pay, and it'll just come out automatically. So that drive to digital, drive to using the payment systems that are available now so commonly online is a huge aspect to remind these agents to do at the end of the conversation. So this is just another example of where the agent was redirected to offer direct pay and then was able to successfully do so on subsequent practices.
So good follow through to a call, right? Just because you're able to collect a payment, right? You didn't get payment in full, you collected a payment. So now there's a whole process that has to go forward. And being able to drive them towards a digital channel that they're probably, preferring anyway,
Hmm.
letting them know whether or not,
Exactly.
or capturing consent for text messages, emails, other things. Like there's so many different opportunities here that allow the collector to free up their own time so that they can focus on the next call, while the systems and technology that, or the digital communications that the organization has in place, are able to do the heavy lift. It's a really interesting approach to that, right? In terms of making sure that you've got a good follow through, right? It's good to have a good golf swing, but if you're not following through, you're not connecting. And so, like, this is that opportunity to make sure that not only are your your people taking a good swing in each one of these calls, but they're following all the way through and achieving as many of the objectives as they can while developing rapport with that consumer. But this kind of coaching in advance, right? How many missed opportunities for dollars would have happened if this agent had to build this plane while they were flying it, right? By going through the flight simulator in advance, you're able to put them on the floor and minimize the lost opportunities that ultimately this agent would have experienced.
Absolutely. Yes. The ability to really work out the kinks and be reminded, because there's so much to remember. Too much to remember, right? And it's an impossible task to have folks go from training directly live to a customer and expect them to remember those things. So getting the reps that are needed to really have it be second nature by the time you're actually talking to a customer is so impactful.
Well, to master the skill set, going through repetition is the best possible way, right? Like going through that process, learning it as you continue to go and to continue to build on the individual skill sets, because there are so many different skills that go into a good call, right? It's not I'm just
Mm-hmm.
negotiating or I'm just asking for the balance in full, but it's about being able to react and respond to all of these different scenarios and situations that you're ultimately going to face throughout, let's say, a month, right? Because some situations being more unique than others. But if you can get out in front of those things and have experienced them prior and not lose these opportunities to push people over to digital, which could cost the organization dollars, or not ask for the balance in full, which is definitely going to cost the organization dollars, right? So they're able
Mm-hmm.
to optimize the way in which they're deploying their resources and optimize the cash flows associated with the resources that they deployed without having to you lose opportunities on the fly.
Absolutely. Yep. Very well said.
Trying to make sure that I'm
And
capturing each piece.
you are, and I mean, it was a perfect segue to this because you mentioned this, right? Practice makes perfect. It's tried and true. And this is something that we always love to share with all of our customers. So we call this a success report. Everyone sees this, and regardless of the industry, of the stories, of the group, everyone's success report looks exactly the
Mm.
same. So I'll walk you through what all this data
Okay.
means. So on the left hand side, you're going to see really just the usage details. So how many folks went through these stories or this training modular through a period of time? How many practices did they take? How many minutes total did they spend with their AI coach? And then what you'll see in the chart, and this is the part that's very consistent across all our user bases, is that agents can prove proficiency the more they practice. So the first line there, so this is the interruptions that an agent has received by story by practice. So on the bottom it's the practice number, and then on the right it's the number of interruptions they received. So the
Mm.
first practice, that's where skyrocketing, right? I'm going to get a ton of interruptions, a ton of reminders to remind me to use those best and required practices. And then by the second, third, fourth, fifth, and it will vary based on story. So all of the different topics have their own line here. So a more difficult topic may take folks longer to decrease some of those interruptions, whereas an easier topic can be faster. But it's really around their speed to proficiency, their ability to prove proficiency, and that really equals close to zero interruptions, so zero reminders that they made a mistake as they go through and practice. So typically but somewhere between the third and fifth practice, your agents really have gotten enough reps, have gotten enough practice to really say, yep, I've mastered this. I'm good. I'm ready to move on to the next story or take live customers or live calls with customers.
That's interesting. I mean, but think about the sheer volume of calls that this entails, right? So if I've got, let's say, 60 people that are making 10 calls, that's a lot of phone calls, right? That's 600 calls that have happened where missed opportunities existed. And that's right, that's
Absolutely.
connected calls even at that, right? So it's not like our total outbound volume, but on right party contact where I'm actually engaged somebody in a conversation, and that's a lot of missed opportunities. So I mean, I'm seeing exponentially the change in the value proposition that, flight simulator in this regard would have.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And not only will you be able to see, okay, my agents are getting better, you're also going to be able to see where they
Mm,
struggled. And you can tell, is it a theme across a new hire group as a whole? Is it one person struggling more than
mm.
others? And again, so you can give that targeted training, whether it be to an entire class or to a user or to certain tenured agents, right? But this is what we call our simulation scorecard. This is an example. It's just a simple snapshot of some of the things that we provide. We have a ton of data behind the scenes. But here, what you'll see on the left is the name of the story. So in this case, it's Lost Job Hard. So I know that the customer is having a very difficult situation. Their RFD is that they lost their job. And so my agents are going through and practicing this story. You can see which agents went through. You can see their activity. So again, how many times did they practice? How many minutes did they spend in the system? And then you'll see based on category. So we have compliance and strategy here. Where did they struggle the most and who struggled more than someone else? So Emily, for instance, did great in compliance. She mastered verifying the customer and reading the payment disclosure in this particular case. But for strategy, she struggled a little bit, right? She got interrupted because she didn't ask an appropriate probing question. She didn't negotiate the customer way. She didn't give a WIFA, what's in it for me, right? So really giving the customer the benefit of making a payment. So she was redirected a total of 3 times in that practice, whereas Tammy wasn't redirected at all. So Tammy was really great at this topic and Emily struggled a little bit more. So along with seeing how agents improve over time, you can also really deep dive into, okay, where do I really want them to focus their time? And especially for Emily in this case, it's really around more strategic conversation.
Mhm.
And she can practice specific stories to help target that increase in learning in that area itself.
So this could also help you identify areas for improvement within your training program itself, right? Like if you're finding consistent issues down a particular channel here, like the auto pay channel, for example, or the auto pay requirement, then maybe you've got an issue in how you're
Mhm.
training people to ask for that auto pay. That's interesting. So you're not only are you sending them through the flight simulator to learn, but you're able to look at kind of the results of that in an aggregated way that enables you to adjust how you're potentially training, hiring, recruiting, right? Like there's something's got to give. If everybody's got the same problem, it's probably a bigger problem that needs to be approached.
Exactly, exactly. And you're able to really, again, make it an individualized training.
Mhm.
So Tammy, for instance, probably doesn't need to practice this story anymore, and she can move on to even more advanced topics, whereas other folks might need to spend a little bit more time. So gone are the days of really making sure you're talking to the class as a whole, and you're going to have some people who are bored and some people who are struggling and left behind. You can really target each of those individualized needs as you practice with a class.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's another way in which this training mechanism tying back to between the training and then the flight simulator, because you got to teach them what you want to teach them, get them out there, and then start working through the individual blocks. It's an interesting approach to the overall problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So, what are some of the KPI lifts that we've seen as results? We've touched a little bit on some of these, and of course, they're going to vary based on industry, based on the stories that you have in here. But these are really 4 consistent things that we've
Mhm.
seen. So, 56% faster speech proficiency. So, that's folks learning the right way faster, whether that be for new hires who are going through your programs for the first time, or folks who are upskilling to different jobs. Maybe they're moving from collections to customer service or vice versa. Or again, maybe they're all learning a new CFPB requirement that's just coming down the pipe. 31% better call quality scores. So call quality is obviously a huge aspect of what folks measure when they go through and utilize Zenarate. 23% higher conversion rates. That's really around the negotiation skills and folks getting confident and comfortable there. And then the one that we've spent a lot of time talking about today, 32% lower employee attrition. Because again, I think especially now more than ever, employees are really looking for their employers to support them in new and interesting ways. And folks don't want to feel like they're on an island. And they want to feel like they're a part of a team that wants to see them succeed. And this is a great way that folks have been able to do that.
Well, what a great way to manage attrition versus just constantly turning people over, right? We all know the expense that comes with turning people over, right? So if we're going to have this constant mill of new people coming through, it's a lot cheaper for us to get to improve the skill set of an existing employee than it is to go find a new good employee that's going to be a culture fit. Interesting solution to a tough
Absolutely.
challenge.
Yes, absolutely. And then just a couple things to touch on before we kind of go into an actual customer who's utilized Zenarate. So it's simple onboarding. So there's no personal account information in the platform whatsoever. There's no benefit to having real customer information in there. So it truly is a sandbox environment. And there's no IT integration. So all that's needed is a Chrome browser and a headset. Log in and engage with your AI coach. And then it's easy to test. So thanks to some of the questions, we were able to touch on this a little earlier, but very easy to upskill your AI coach to learn your best and required practices, and then deploy that to your agents to really consistently train them across the way.
Excellent. So I know we're coming up on the end of the hour, and I know you have some other examples to run through. So I think you and I can kind of keep going here. For anybody that has to drop off for a hard stop at the hour, we will be posting this as a follow up to YouTube later this week. So you all will get a notification as well. So if you can't stick around for the final piece here, you will be able to watch it on video.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. Yeah. And just one final piece. So, a lot of folks like to say, well, what did this look like in action? So ERC is one of our customers. They were able to really solve a couple problems. The challenges were really similar to what we talked about at the beginning, but they really wanted their customer facing teams to get hands-on training. And they wanted to make sure it was scalable, that they would reach employees who were in different locations, even different locations around the world, improve their KPI performance, and infuse those best practices across the organization. So one site wasn't learning something different than another site was, and really amplify those coaching moments. So they really care a lot about their employees, and they want to make sure that they feel supported. So they were able to deploy their ERC AI coach across their organization, and their agents have loved it. They were able to see an immediate lift in dollars collected, higher employee satisfaction scores, and they also reduced their 30 to 60 day nesting and floor attrition. So that's really where it gets to keeping people in the role, in the seats for longer, as a result of them being able to feel supported throughout. So I just wanted to touch on that to give folks really a live example or a real life example of where maybe one of their peers was able to succeed by utilizing their AI coach.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's always great to talk about the the high level. Here's what we feel, but to see the hard numbers behind it as well is always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll give people just one more moment here to ask any additional questions that you may have about Zenarate, AI coaching, artificial intelligence, anything that we kind of talked about here today. In the meantime, Holly, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you coming on. I enjoyed going through a deeper dive than we did on the receivables roundtable and getting a better understanding of ultimately how all these little building blocks are turning into such a powerful solution for the call center world.
I appreciate it, Adam. I love talking about this. It's so fun to really help people every day, right? I mean, not many people get to say that. And I just feel so lucky and that I was able to have this conversation with you, and that we get to work with our customers every day and making people great.
Awesome. Well, I haven't seen any final questions come up. So, for anybody who has additional questions, you can email me or Holly. We're happy to start an email string if you have anything you want to discuss in private. But in the short term, Holly, thank you so much for coming on today. I'll see you again soon.
Hi, Adam. Thank you.